now.
Why is that?
Thanks.
Can you hear them?
Are there technical difficulties happening? We ready? All right. The Board of Direct Entry Midwifery meeting is convening at 8:08 a.m. on April 13th, 2023 at the Health Licensing Office in Salem, Oregon by telephone conference call. I will now call roll. Kelsey Fisher here. Meredith Klein.
Here.
Wendy Smith.
Here.
Christine Morales.
Here.
Lynette Pettibone. It looked like Lynette was here.
Supposed to be on.
Yeah, it looks like she maybe dropped off. Lynette is not here at the moment. Meredith Mance also not arrived yet, but we have quorum. So members, when you wish to speak, please state your last name for the record. Board members are asked to not use the chat feature during meeting. Public members wishing to speak must first sign in on the roster sheet available. For public members calling in on the public phone line, please email April Fleming at april.fleming@oha.oregon.gov and provide your first and last name. Public and interested parties' feedback may be heard during the public interested parties' feedback period if indicated on the agenda. Everyone is asked to use appropriate language, manners, and protocol while conducting board business. This meeting is called to order. Our first agenda item is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or want to make a motion to approve?
Motion to approve. Wendy Smith.
Thanks, Wendy.
This is Christine. I second.
A motion has been made and seconded. I'll call for a vote. Kelsey Fisher, aye. Meredith Klein.
Aye.
Wendy Smith.
Aye.
Christine Morales.
Aye.
Lynette, are you here yet? No. Meredith, are you here yet? No. Motion passes. The agenda is approved. On to items for board action, or the rules discussion. Sammy, if you're talking, you're muted.
Hello, mic was off. So I presented an issue statement just showing that you had 2 racks, one in September and one in January. The January one was just to talk about peer review. In February, you approved proposed rules, which we filed in the March Oregon Bulletin. We received comment from March 1 to March 28th. In that time, we had one piece of comment received from Sophie Akerson, the Oregon Midwifery Council, liking all of the rules as they were, only suggesting that Oregon be added to basically number 5 of the peer review rule. An LDM who's attending births must present at least 2 cases per year for peer review with an Oregon midwifery peer review organization. Their organization wants Oregon out, and she gives some examples of other organizations that might want to do it that aren't in Oregon. The birthing center, let me get into that. So Washington State, Midwifery Alliance, Washington State, Oregon, Commission for Accreditation of Birth Centers, MANA, CABC. So several of them that may be interested in doing it, but if they're not Oregon licensed, they wouldn't qualify. So that was their only change. There was also a hearing on March 18th, I think, March 16th, and Amelia, the president of OMC, basically gave the same response, that everything was good. They just wanted to have Oregon removed from that rule. Other than that, it was a smooth public comment period. That was the only change. So discuss. And then we would, once you adopt them, I would file them permanent as of May 1. That'd be effective March 1st.
Anyone have any thoughts on the feedback of removing Oregon? Wendy, is your hand?
I guess this is Wendy. My only thought is, rules are different by state, right? And I guess, I don't ever think it's wrong to have more people, but I guess there has to be some, adjustment based on Oregon rules, and the discussion around it.
Yeah, so for the way that it's written, for it to count as a peer review, it has to include at least 2 other Oregon licensed midwives. So there would be, at least theoretically, even if you're peer reviewing at Moz in Washington, for it to count for your peer review, there would have to be at least 2 other people who also theoretically know the same rules.
This is Meredith Klein. I feel like we talked about this before when we were discussing it, and I don't remember why we had decided to keep it as Oregon. Maybe we didn't have that protection, like what you just said, Kelsey, of having 2 Oregon LDMs, because I think in general, improving access to midwives to have peer review is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is Wendy. I would move to approve with that condition of, having the 2 Oregon midwives. Can I move to approve at this point?
Yeah, is there anyone else who has any other comments on any of the rules?
Are we just talking about the peer review right now? Because they had something interesting also about the intrauterine growth restriction and racial difference, which are we going to talk about that next?
I think we should talk about it all so that we can just make one motion to approve the whole draft. So if you want to talk about the fetal growth restriction, I think that they were just saying that they liked where it was, because of that was just support for it being as an indication to consult.
Yeah, to consult, not transport.
Yeah, which is where it is in the draft right now. Mm-hmm.
Would we want to put the specific organizations that they mentioned, or leave it more open?
I think that we shouldn't be dictating in the rules which organizations people can go to, because then, if there's a new one, then we'd have to change the rules about it. And
Yeah, right. Okay.
People haven't been super fond of us telling them exactly what they should do, which makes sense. But
And just as a reminder, when you guys met in February, it was presented as Oregon in there, and you left it in there. Just wanted to point that out.
I think I was having strong feelings about it that day, and I don't feel as strongly about it now. Like, I think that, especially for people that live like in Portland, to be able to peer review in Vancouver, with Moz seems fine, or with national organizations, or I feel like we have a lot of kind of guidance already on what constitutes a peer review and what kind of entity to do peer review with, and if people are following those guidelines, then it doesn't matter what organization it is. Was there any other part of the draft rules that we wanted to discuss?
Lynette entered the meeting about 3 minutes ago on the phone.
Wendy, your hand is up. Did you have something else to say?
I do. Yeah, I guess I do want to go back to the fetal growth restriction. And so we landed on that as an indication for consult only.
Yeah.
All right. So I would like to pull that out for my own. I can pull that out, right? As my own,
For your own vote, you mean?
for my vote. Yeah.
It depends on how you vote. If you want to vote individually by rule or all together, then you can make the motion to remove it and people could agree or not agree.
Okay, then I guess I'd like to say, I guess I would like to vote individually then. Is that, I'll make that suggestion.
I'm guessing that your motion then is to remove the fetal growth restriction from indication to consult, and you would propose moving it to indication for transfer?
That's correct.
Let's take a vote on that proposal. Well, actually, does anyone second that proposal? You don't have
This is
to.
Christine.
Thanks,
I second that. I feel like it should be an indication for transfer.
This is one I would want to talk about it a little bit more. I'm not sure I'm understanding why there's a proposal to put it under consult. I think we had started off recommending it under transfer.
So originally we did have it under transfer, and it came out of the Rules Advisory Committee that they recommended it be in consult, and some of that was about the growth curves being used being problematic because they're not like accurate across various race and ethnicity, and so fetal growth restriction can be inaccurately diagnosed in like up to 15% of cases, particularly if the birthing parent is of Asian descent. And also because of the accuracy of like a single diagnosis, like a diagnosis of fetal growth restriction on a single scan, given the like inaccuracy of third trimester ultrasound. Those were the arguments or it being an indication to consult. And it seemed like the Rules Advisory Committee was pretty clear that that's where they recommended it be.
Correct. And you guys approved it as the proposed rule.
Mm-hmm. Which I don't think Wendy was here that day.
Yeah, I don't believe that I would have agreed to that, so, or voted for that.
I guess my thinking is that we'd be putting a whole lot of babies in harm's way to give 15% of the population a more opportunity to have their baby in their location of choice. So I'm just not sure that number, knowing that number now makes me feel better about it.
Yeah, and I think that like just because somebody is like it's an indication for consult doesn't mean that that person is still appropriate for care, right? And like we have a lot of rules around communicating consults to the clients and documenting them. Wendy?
Well, and I think just along the lines of the ethnic and racial disparities, I mean, you know, if you look at the ethnic and racial demographics of people having community birth, while I would, you know, love to see that it spread across, you know, more racial and ethnic communities, it doesn't, frankly, right now, and it's the demographics are predominantly people for whom those growth curves were created, and I guess you know, I think I just would say that there are times when growth restriction is diagnosed that there's commentary regarding the likelihood of this being you know, a characteristic of the family, and I think there has to be some discussion about it. But I do truly think that if growth restriction is diagnosed as, you know, meeting all the criteria, which is pretty, you know, it's pretty strict, and I have to say that the growth restriction that we see, you know, gets into trouble in labor at times, and I think my real concern is, yeah, if 85% of that is accurate and there's no monitoring going on during, or not monitoring, no intermittent monitoring going on in labor, you know, it does concern me for a very small group of people in our community undergoing community birth. So I'm just going to say that. That makes sense. I mean, just that the vast majority of the people undergoing community birth in Oregon are not of not Black or Asian, you know, and while I would love to see everybody treated as they are as an individual, I think some of these rules have to protect, or are meant to protect, the vast majority of people undergoing community birth.
This is Meredith Klein. I'm just wondering if we could put something in there, like my recollection of it was to kind of allow for some discernment by the midwife, and allow for like a follow-up ultrasound or follow-up collaboration with, you know, the higher level provider that did the ultrasound instead of somebody being risked out immediately on that first ultrasound. I mean, sometimes it's pretty clear and sometimes it's not, based on the things that were recommended by the rules advisory. So I mean, I can understand the like wanting to go towards the majority, but then also that's not an invitation for more diversity in out of hospital birth if our rules aren't, allowing for that kind of difference in an ultrasound. I don't know. It's hard to remember the whole conversation we had before, but we arrived on indicate to put it in the indication for consult. I think with the idea that like the consult is a conversation, and then sometimes it's going to lead to a transport, and sometimes it's not, and that the midwife should be able to be part of that discernment.
This is my question is, do we have the consult being required with a provider who does hospital delivery? Or is it just a consult with anybody?
It's currently written as a consult with anybody, but we've done that for other rules, so we could make that amendment. Wendy, your hand is up.
Yeah, I guess I still don't agree with that. I mean, I have seen fetal growth restriction, the non-obstetrical providers that I have seen managing this do not. I have seen a lack of appreciation for the issues that fetuses have during labor, quite a bit, and I also have seen a very, very supportive, collaborative feeling within the community that are scanning these babies appropriately, such that if there is some resolution or if there is some sense around growth restriction that doesn't either resolves or doesn't need that provider, I have seen people return to the community or return to the lower risk provider. And I feel like we are really jeopardizing people's care by suggesting that won't happen, and that there isn't a real, that this isn't really a problem. I mean, these are fetuses that get into trouble at the end of labor. I mean, that's where this happens. And they're not being monitored in a way that allows us to act quickly or, and I have seen trouble with these babies. They're more likely to have meconium. The mom is more likely to have some hypertensive issues towards the end. And I just feel like there is a lack of appreciation in some providers, including family medicine providers. I have to admit, I don't know who was on that rack. I'm wondering if there was a perinatologist on that rack. I'm not aware of that. So I feel like there's a little bit of a lack of real understanding around the trouble that these babies can get into.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what you think, Wendy, about places that are more rural and might not have the access to like higher level ultrasound. I'm just thinking, and it's not related to fetal growth restriction, but even between Salem, like when I have someone have an ultrasound in Salem and then they go up for a follow-up at OHSU for a higher level ultrasound, it's definitely different what they're able to see and assess. And sometimes it's like, oh no, the thing they were worried about isn't even an issue. So could that be a complicating factor for someone who doesn't have access to as good of ultrasound resources?
Well, what would you propose? I mean, what would you propose for that? I think the question is, are you willing to, potentially sacrifice those patients because they have inadequate ultrasound? What would you rather do? Err on the side of conservatism or err on the side of, well, it's possible that it's a mistake?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm asking the question to you as an obstetrician, is that your perspective on there could be error in ultrasound based on, I mean, I don't do fetal growth
I mean,
restriction.
there's always error in third trimester ultrasounds, but I think it protects the baby to err on the side of it be, if it's diagnostic of growth restriction, to err on the side that that's correct, because often when we do those, third trimester ultrasounds, it's around the time of delivery, so we don't really have the time to get another like it can impact the fetus's overall well-being and likelihood that they're going to be okay when they're born if we delay to get another ultrasound and another opinion and continue, that can really impact their well-being.
This is Kelsey. I just wanted to respond to something that Wendy said about, often seeing more like hypertensive issues or meconium, and just noting that those are already indications to transfer. And so, I think that there's definitely some confounding factors that have. Do you want to respond, Wendy?
I do, yeah. So those are often things that you'll see in labor, right? So I think it is so dramatic, the percentage of people that come in for a growth restricted induction. I mean, that's the other thing is, growth restricted babies need an induction, right? Or the recommendation is for an induction. If you start compromising that and letting people go into labor, because you say, well, maybe it's not, maybe it's just because the dad is 5'4", right? If you start compromising the recommendations of your consultants, because they will recommend that they're induced, then you're one, definitely compromising the care, and two, the hypertensive things. I mean, the percentage of people that we see come in for an induction for growth restriction that evolved during labor is really pretty marked. So you've already missed this window of opportunity. So I disagree with your saying those are likely to risk people out, because those are things that you're seeing when it's almost too late. And transfer is mandatory. So our job is to protect, is for safety and population, community, statewide safety. And as I said, err on the side of safety. Don't err on the side of, well, it might be okay. And I can't, on this rule, I disagree with this completely.
Sammy, can you confirm that if we moved the fetal growth restriction at this point from indication to consult to indication to transfer, that would be like a substantive enough change that it would kick us back into needing like another public comment period?
I sent Heather an email, but she's probably not paying attention, but she's on. I'm not sure, to be honest, but she might be able to answer. Sorry, Heather, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but
that's okay.
I'm not
My
positive.
email probably didn't get to you yet. I responded, but
you did.
sometimes there's
There it
electronic
is.
issues. So we would need to determine that by looking at the notice to see if the notice is broad enough to cover this change back. At the, currently there's a motion on the table to remove it from indication to consult and move it to indication to transfer. Were that motion to pass, then we would be looking at the notice to see whether it would be covered in this rulemaking, and we could go ahead and make that change. And if it's not covered under this particular notice, then the rule would remain as it is, where it's already as an indication to transfer. It's just in that other part, it's in the other provision. So what the board originally was doing was just calling it out to make it its own standalone provision under the indication to transfer. So it would just default back to what it is now. And then if the board wanted to if we looked at the notice, rulemaking notice, and said, hey, this isn't, we're not going to be able to call it out as a separate provision, given the notice, then the board could make a decision to file a new notice and call it out as a separate division into a new rulemaking. So we can make those determinations and take a look at that after the board decides what it wants to do. But as a default, if that vote were to pass, it would just stay as an indication to transfer, because that's where it is currently, just not called out, if that makes sense.
So currently the board was considering that fetal growth restriction counts as abnormal fetal surveillance, which is an indication to transfer, but that wasn't clear. So we added this for clarity, and then the RAC recommended it be an indication to consult instead of transfer.
Correct. So it would just stay under that provision for the indication to transfer if the vote were to pass. Happy to answer any other questions.
It sounds though that like the motion is to have it listed out separately as an indication to transfer, because I think that we all agreed that we wanted more clarity around it. Does that change the?
Well, what I was hearing was that the board would be voting on the rules separately. And so assuming that that is called out and said, the motion is to remove the fetal growth restriction from the indication to consult, move it to indications to transfer, say that passes. And so then the other rules are voted on separately and those pass. So then the other rule changes pass, but the fetal growth restriction is the one that is called out. So if that makes sense, so that's why we would be looking at it separately under the notice, but the other rule pieces would either fail or pass depending on the other individual votes that the board takes. So now if you combine them as a group and vote on everything together, that changes the scenario.
So I think if you move it and pick it up and specifically say it in transfer, that's when we'll have to look at the notice. If you were to just remove it from consult and leave it as is, then we wouldn't. It just would come out and be as it is today. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
unless there was another vote taken and another vote after that were to be made, such as, I hate to make things more complicated, but if this motion goes up and it's voted down, then someone else can make a different motion and say, I move to pass the draft rule as it is with the fetal growth restriction as an indication to consult. And then if the board passed that, then that would be the action of the board. Or if that failed, then that would be the action of the board. So it really depends on how the voting goes and what votes and motions are made today. But with the current motion on the table, the way it is worded, and if it's called out from the other rules and it passes, then either it would stay as an indication to transfer, regardless of whether it is a standalone provision or whether the rule remains the same as it is today. I wish I had a whiteboard.
I feel concerned about just kicking it back to indication to transfer, not because I want to be attending growth restricted, birth at home with growth restricted babies, but because there was a reason that we had decided that, because the RAC recommended it, both of the only pieces of public comment, both supported it. And I feel like there needs to be a way for us to account for 15% is not insignificant of people that might not be represented well by that ultrasound, plus the lack of access for some people. So I don't know how to reword it to allow for further inquiry for people that are in categories that might not be represented by just your standard ultrasound looking at growth, while still keeping true growth restriction as a indication for transfer. So I think those concerns are real, and yet it's also true that those babies have trouble in labor. So truly, we don't want to be inducing them at home.
So, does it appease anyone to leave it in indication for consult if we require that the consult is with a physician doing hospital delivery?
No. Well,
Okay.
no, Wendy.
That doesn't work for Wendy. Got it. Let's see.
This is Lynette. Wendy, can you tell us more about why that doesn't feel comfortable to you?
There are a wide variety of people that are doing hospital births that don't have a lot of experience doing growth restricted babies and don't understand what happens to them. I think if you are doing a limited number of deliveries in your time as a hospital provider, and I'm just frankly going to say I've seen family medicine doctors completely underestimate what they've got in their hands. I've seen some midwives not understand the fine points of growth restricted. I think that the truth of the matter is that you're right. Some growth restricted is not like other growth restricted, but understanding the subtleties of that is difficult. And I think until you've sort of seen what you can get with some of those babies, it's very, very hard for me to feel comfortable having anybody just say, it's probably going to be okay.
Well, this is Kelsey, and I think that that's not what's happening. I think that when we put something in an indication for consult, like we're saying, hey, this has a significant possibility for increased risk, so get more information and more clarity for the decision making.
I hear you, Kelsey, and if I truly believed that each of the providers that I have come in contact with through my years in doing this were going to kind of abide by some of those feelings and not try to push that, I would feel more comfortable. But I think this is a diagnosis where babies can die, and my job in this role is for public safety. This is not a low risk pregnancy. We are community midwives are supposed to be managing low risk pregnancies. We are continually pushing those boundaries, and it's not acceptable. If you look up low risk pregnancy, fetal growth restriction will not be in that diagnosis. So I'm sorry, I cannot move beyond that.
This is Kelsey, and I think that I have concerns about moving this in a way that wouldn't initiate another public comment period. Is it possible for the board to just decide we want another public comment period for this particular rule, regardless of how it's covered in the notice? Because I know that we really discussed this a lot, and the RAC was really clear with their recommendation. And I think that it's fair that people get an opportunity to talk about it if there's a big change like this from the proposal.
I mean, I'm still one provider. What can I say? I am still just one board member. I'm being vocal about my concern. I'm going to vote no, right, to have this. I'm going to vote for transfer. It's up, I don't know what to say. I don't think this is right. I guess I don't understand. I guess I'd like to hear who was on the rack. I'd like you all to understand who's on the rack so that we can hear how this is gonna play out. I mean, I'd like to hear who made public comment. Did any perinatologist make public comment? Did any obstetrician make public comment? I mean, this is the issue. The people that speak out are not the people that feel strongly, because I think there's limited information that they even have that they can. So, I mean, I guess I don't agree with this. If we can go back to public comment and I can go try to round up a lot more public comment, I will, but I don't agree with this. And however you want to deal with that, I just need this documented that I don't agree with this.
There was only 2 pieces of public comment, at least in our materials for today, right? I mean, one of them was from Selka Akerson, and the other one was from Emilia, who's now the president of OMC. So both people that are pretty well informed and researched.
Both of them
I
were on the
would
rack.
love to get greatest hits if we have them from the rack, just to remind us. I think sometimes it's the process takes so long that we forget what our conversation was before and how we came to it. I don't know if now is the time for that, but
I can send you the report.
that would answer some. I mean, that's also what Wendy's asking, right? Who was on the rack and what was some of the conversation? Which I know you've told us already. It's just a refresher might be helpful, or maybe we just want to move it again, like Kelsey's suggesting, to open it up.
You tell me what you want me to do. I'm happy to do any one of the above.
So I do want to just remind the board that you'll want to also deal with the motion to have some finality there. Either it needs to be withdrawn or it needs to be voted upon per what usually happens with the motions. And then if I think there was a question from Kelsey, I'm not sure if that was directed towards me or Sammy, but yes, if there's a rule that you are not ready to move forward to adopt, then you don't have to be moving that forward, depending on what the board's vote is, and you could do more work on it. You could do another rulemaking on it. So just because you put it out there for notice doesn't mean you need to adopt that rule. So, if that makes sense. Sammy, did you want to say anything on that point?
But they could just extend it and say, we want to have 20 more days of comments on this specific rule, and then we could go from there. Or you can start all over and have another rack, and I file a new notice and all of that.
Well, it seems like maybe we should go ahead with the vote on Wendy's proposal, and then we can decide if we want to just have another public comment period or restart or just go ahead with it. So to confirm, the proposal was removing fetal growth restriction from indication to consult and adding it explicitly to indication for transfer. And Wendy, that's the motion can you just confirm that that's the motion?
Sure, yes.
And Christine seconded it. So let's vote. Kelsey Fisher, nay. Meredith Klein,
Nay.
Wendy Smith,
Yes.
Christine Morales,
Aye. Yes.
Lynette Pettibone,
Aye.
and is Meredith, did Meredith arrive? Nope. All right, so that motion did pass. So we are proposing, so we, in our rules, have now moved fetal growth restriction from indication to consult to indication for transfer. I would personally love to see us have another comment period before we adopt that as a finalized rule. Does anyone have thoughts on that?
I would like that too, because what would be my preference is to have something that's new that suggests a little more discernment in the growth restriction.
So Kelsey, I think you need to call for the vote or disregard that motion. So Wendy made a motion, Christine seconded, and then now you've had discussion. So does that make sense?
I mean, we voted and Wendy's motion passed.
Okay. So it
Right.
was 4-1.
It was 3-2.
That's not passing. It has to be 4. It's a quorum.
Oh, it's not majority, it's quorum.
Correct.
So our motion is
Failed.
failed.
Did not pass.
Okay. Thanks for catching that, Sammy. But it does, we do have support for moving it. So is that something that we could do, is move it as a draft and have another public comment period on it?
Like move it up to transfer.
Yes.
You could, yeah.
How does that sound to people?
Can you, I'm not, what do you mean move it up to transfer?
So like, we could put out another draft
I
of the
think
rules.
That's where
Or-
we'd have to have Heather review the notice to see if we'd have to file a new notice. Does that make sense?
So you would be you'd be adjusting the rules so that it went to consult, and then you'd be putting that back out for public comment? Is that what you're saying?
No, I was saying that we change our draft to have it in transfer and then put that to public comment.
I don't think you can do that. I think that if you wanted to just take it out and go back to what it is now, you could do that. Or you could put up public comment for what it is in the proposed rule now, which is under consult. But if you want to add it as a specific one under transfer, Heather will need to look at the notice. And if we can do it in the notice, then I think we could probably extend comment. But if not, we'd have to do a new notice.
I see.
I think that's,
And a new
think
notice
that's
would mean
correct.
a new rack and all of that.
You don't have to do a rack. It's
Okay.
not a requirement. So that would be a decision that you could make if you want me to hold a rack or not.
Okay. It says
Having-
here, it say Steve Long.
Having to do a whole new notice sounds arduous.
There's a $96 charge.
Could we take a 5-minute break?
Sure. Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 9:01.
Thank you. Sammy, can you
Sorry.
blow me?
Sorry about my microphone.